All right. Good morning, gentlemen. Uh, I hope you understood yesterday's lesson. I know it can get a little confusing, but just like in everything in math, the more you practice it, the better you get at it. So the past couple of days, we've been working only with sine functions, but today we're only going to be working on cosine graphs, on how to graph those functions. I mean, they have the exact same properties. There's still an amplitude, the frequency, the phase shift. It looks almost the same. The only thing that's changed is you're going to change that sign to a cosine. So I have y is equal to a cosine of b x minus c plus d. All right, this is the exact same thing that we did with the sign. So the a is still the amplitude, the b is still the frequency, the c is the phase change, and the phase shift, I'm sorry, and D is the vertical shift. All right, it has the exact same properties. All right, now the graph is going to look a little different in an aspect, um, but those properties are still the same. All right, so for you guys to see this, I'm going to show you. So in black, I'm going to have y is equal to sine of x, and in blue, I'm going to have y is equal to cosine of x. All right, so now we've been working with this. You should know how y equals the sine of x looks like. So I'm going to have here I'm going to have pi over 2, here I'm going to have pi, here I'm going to have 3 pi over 2, and here I'm going to have 2 pi. Here I'm going to have 1, here I'm going to have negative 1. Okay, so if I'm going to do this, all right, I know that I start off at 0, 0, then I go to, for this is for sine, and it looks like this. Right? Makes this wave. Alright? Now, for the cosine of x, the way this is going to look, alright, we got to think of our unit circle. Alright? So we have the cosine of 0 is equal to 1. The cosine of pi over 2 is equal to 0. The cosine of pi is equal to negative 1. The cosine of 3 pi over 2 is equal to 0. And then the cosine of 2 pi is equal to 1. Alright? So we have this. So now, this right here are your x's, and this right here is your y. So whenever you, 0, you go to 0, your y is going to be 1. Then at pi over 2, your x is pi over 2, then it's 0. At pi is negative 1. At 3 pi over 2, it's 0. And at 2 pi, let's go back to 1. So it looks like this. Include the little wave behind it. Okay? If not, it's just going to look like a U. And this is how it looks. So it has the same shape, it's just moved and has different values. Alright, so now I'm going to show you an example, alright, of a vertical shift and an amplitude change. Alright, so I'm going to have graph y is equal to 3 cosine of x minus 1. So we have an amplitude change of 3 and a vertical shift of negative 1. We know it's a vertical shift because it's not inside parentheses and it's outside. There's no parentheses. So that we know that it's a vertical shift. So now I'm going to graph this. I have this graph right here. Do I have a phase shift? No. Do I have a period change? No. So now the points that I'm going to be working with are, in my x, are going to be pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Now, the one thing that I do have, it is a vertical shift. So I have a new midline. So I have negative 1, negative 2. So here at negative 1, I have to include my new midline, right? So it looks like this. All right. Now, the amplitude change. Okay. So my amplitude change. So the way that the cosine is going to work. Cosine is always going to start at the max point, the maximum it's going to get. So here I have, it normally will start at 1, but my amplitude is, it will start at 1, right? But in this case, my midline changed, and it went down 1, and I'm going up 3 because of my amplitude. So my max would be at 2, right? Because this is my new midline right here. My -1 is my new midline, and it's going to increase by 3. The amplitude is 3. So -1 plus 3 is 2. So that's where it's going to start, at 2. At 2 is where it's going to be the highest it's going to be. Now, at pi over 2, we said that it's going to go to what? If I look here, it goes to 0. But in this case, I have a new midline, right? So it's going to go right here. And then at pi, right, since there's an amplitude change as well, I'm going to have to go to -3 and -4 right here. So at pi is going to go to -4, right? And then at 3 pi over 2, it's going to go back to our new midline. And then at 2 pi, it's going to go up to 2, because that's our max. So you just connect the dots, and it looks like this. All right. So you always start off at your max value. The way you're going to do that is your vertical shift. So vertical shift plus the altitude, the change in altitude. Okay. So that's how you're going to know. So that's how I got this point right there. It's the vertical shift plus the altitude. All right. So now, oh my God, amplitude, not altitude, amplitude. Amplitude. All right. So now we have that. So it's vertical shift plus amplitude. That's how I got the first point. Then let's graph one that has a vertical and a phase shift. All right. So this is very common. You're just gonna move it. Your period's not changing, and your frequency is not changing, and you don't have a change in amplitude. All right. So example: graph y is equal to cosine of x minus pi over 4 plus 2. Now, like I said before, we don't have a frequency change and we don't have an amplitude change. So the amplitude is still going to go 1, so it's going to go 1 up and 1 down. All right. There is going to be a phase shift, so you're going to have to grab your graph and move it to the right or to the left. In this case, we're going to move it to the right, pi over 4. Now, the first thing I told you was to put your dotted lines from your graph. So that is exactly what I'm going to do. So first off, we have C is equal to negative pi over 4, and D is equal to 2. So once I graph this, I'm going to put it right here. Okay. I'm going to have this here. Now, I'm going to use this in green, and I'm going to use the dotted line here in gray. All right. So I'm going to put my, since it's negative pi over 4, I know it's going to move to the right pi over 4, right? So my first point right here, pi over 4. I'm going to do my dotted line right there. Okay, so this is quote unquote my new y-axis. Now, here I have a vertical change of 2. So that means that I have to put a new dotted line here at 2. All right, so I'm going to put in gray, I'm going to have this right here. So this point at pi over 4 and 2, that is my new 0. Okay, but now I'm working with cosine. All right, once I'm working with cosine, right, it has my first point is going to be my vertical shift plus the amplitude. So my vertical shift is at 2, so vertical shift plus amplitude. So my vertical shift was 2 and my amplitude is 1, so it's at 3. So my first point I know for this graph is going to be right here. Well, now you're probably wondering, Mr. O, what are the next points they're going to be, because we don't have any more labeled in our x-axis. Well, I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first point, phase shift points. Phase shifts points. I should have told you this also with the sign. This is going to help you in how to figure those things out. So the first point, so there's 5 points, right? This one and then 4 more, the initial. And so the first one is just your max point here for your cosine, so your max point. All right, your second point is your first point plus the step size, plus, I should do that in red, plus your step size. The step size, you find it where it's your period, right? So that means you divide your period by your frequency. So in this case, it's only going to be pi over 2, right? Because 2 pi divided by 4 is pi over 2. Your third point is going to be your second point plus your step size. And then your fourth point is going to be your third point plus your step size. And then your fifth point is going to be your fourth point plus your step size. Alright, so now, like I said, let's figure out the step size. So, what is my step size? My step size, right, or my period, is going to be 2 pi, right? And what is my frequency? 1, right? So it's 2 pi divided by 1, which is equal to, my period is 2 pi, and then divided by 4, that means that each step size is going to be pi over 2. All right, so my first point, right, is going to be pi over 4 and 3, and the next one is going to be, my second point is going to be, my first point, which is pi over 4 plus pi over 2, which is equal to 3 pi over 4. So that's the next point that I have here. So it's 3 pi over 4. And then I have the third is going to be 3 pi over 4 plus pi over 2, which is equal to what? 5 pi over 4. Then my fourth is going to be equal to 5 pi over 4 plus pi over 2, which is equal to 7 pi over 4. And my fifth and last point is going to be 7 pi over 4 plus pi over 2, which is equal to 9 pi over 4. So these are going to be my x-axis labels. So I have 3 pi over 4, then I have 5 pi over 4, then I have 7 pi over 4, and then I have 9 pi over 4. Now, if I think back, right, this is my new midline, my new x-axis, so I'm going to be working with that. Okay, so there's not going to be there's not an amplitude change, so it's going to go up 1 and down 1. So there it started at pi over 4 and 3. Then at 3 pi over 4 is going to go to my new midline. Then at 5 pi over 4 is going to go to 1, right, because it's the amplitude change. And then at 7 pi over 4, it's going to go back up to my midline. And then at 9 pi over 4, it's going to go back to my highest point at 3. So this is how that graph looks. All right. This is it's exactly the same as we were working with the sine. Just the graph kind of looks different, but the process is exactly the same. So again, if you have any questions, any problems, please don't hesitate to email me. I'll try to answer as soon as possible. Y'all have a great day.